I believe that we all want to live a life, make choices, have experiences that, when we add all of those things together, leave us feeling that when we picture ourselves on our deathbed, we can look back and say with a sense of calm, I'm glad that I spent most of my time doing those things. But how do we actually make those choices in a way that feels intentional and doesn't fill us with existential dread to the point that we can just be frozen with the thought of it all? That's the question I had in my early 30s. And in this video, I'm going to share the bulletproof ways that are founded in psychological research that you can use to apply them to your life. These ideas are founded in acceptance and commitment therapy. I've trained under the world's leading expert, Dr. Russ Harris, author of multiple books, including The Happiness Trap, amongst many others. And I know it's a profound way to change the way that you see your life and the things that you do with it. If you're interested in more ideas similar to this, jump down to the links in the description below. Do you want to know what it feels like to write a book, or play a musical instrument, or become an animation content creator, or just simply not regret that you didn't spend more time with your family, or less time at work? That you're glad that you took the chance for lazy afternoons in the sunshine with friends as often as you could, without feeling the pressure of rushing on to the next thing? In other words, if you woke up tomorrow and were 80 years old simply overnight, what do you want to say you spent more of your time doing as you look back on your life? To really get to the answer, we first have to answer the question of why do we keep putting off questions like this in the first place? Alain de Botton, the brilliant modern-day philosopher and founder of the School of Life, again, I'll put links in the description down below, frames this idea of this hesitation around these questions and why we do it like this. Our hesitation is grounded in a sense of risk. Every move presents us with appalling dangers. A new house might not be right. The change of career might lead to ruin. The beloved might reject us. But our inaction is not in itself cost-free, for in the wings, out of regular conscious awareness, there is something arguably even more frightening than failure: the tragedy of wasting our lives. He goes on to say, we need regular, forceful encounters with reminders that there is something else we should be far more frightened of than embarrassment around holding someone's hand, or a bit of trouble as we change the subject of our university degree. This plays directly into what the Stoics also believed. They're the highly popular school of philosophical thought that you tend to see everywhere around the internet these days. And for good reason. They had a lot of very good ideas that also make sense and matter to us today. And one of their core phrases that they turned to time and time again was something called memento mori. It simply means, remember, you will die. Now, the natural feeling is that when we remind ourselves of death is to feel like it's a really morbid and sad and existential thought. Why would we want to spend time thinking about those sorts of things? But there's a great usefulness in just thinking about the fact that we will die, because it forces us to face into those big, hairy questions of what do I want my life to have stood for? And once we've figured out what some of those answers might be, it can act as a massive springboard for us to then think about what we want to do about them now, today, while we still have time to change them. Because when we have an image in our minds of what we want our lives to have stood for, and we regularly confront the idea that our lives will come to an end, and we don't know when that will be, these reminders transform from being something potentially morbid into incredibly useful filters for our life. Filters that help us to clarify and make sense of what truly matters, what you really care about and what you don't. And the reason why that matters is that's incredibly useful for then making choices and decisions today, in the present moment, in situations that you can change and control in order to take small little steps towards that envisioned future that you really want for yourself. But to do that, we need to have an idea about how to form that picture in the first place, how to start seeing that idea of what we want to move towards, to then be able to use it to motivate us to make the tiny little steps and take the tiny little actions and choices today that can help us step towards it. Now, there are many esoteric, hypothetical, theoretical ways that we could go about this, but I believe the simplest ones are the most effective. So before we jump into this exercise, I just briefly want to frame this correctly so it doesn't cause a spiral of existential dread. I want you to pull out a piece of paper and a pen, and then I want you to keep 3 specific words in mind as you step through this exercise. And those 3 words are open, curious, and flexible. Think about this as simply an experiment. It's not a resolution that you can't back out of. If you start drifting into fears and worries that feel like they're pulling you away from the exercise, which would be completely natural if that were the case, simply take a deep breath, push your feet into the floor, straighten your back, all of which would just help you to bring you back into the present moment, and then bring those 3 words back to mind: open, curious, and flexible. Remember, this is just an experiment. It's something to play around with. It's not a permanent state of being for the rest of your life. And the exercise is very simply just to imagine your future deathbed. Really get into this, and again, play around with this idea: open, curious, and flexible, with a bit of playfulness to it as well. But I want you to imagine that you're on your deathbed. Now, nothing traumatic has happened to you. You're simply lying there, knowing that your time is slowly ticking away. But you're not in any pain, you're not in discomfort. You just have a calm, reassuring sense that the end is ultimately coming. And now you're lying there, reflecting back on your life, and specifically on how you spent your time. And the question I want you to consider and start writing down some thoughts around is really simple. What do you want to say you spent most of your time doing? And the key part here is thinking about the doing, not so much about how you want to say you felt or emotions you experienced, because we can't really control those things as much as we can control the actions that we carried out in the time that we had. So other questions to think about are things like, who do you want to say that you spent most of your time with? What are the things you did that you feel grateful for? What are you glad you took the chance to do or risked something in order to experience? What are you pleased that you did more or less of? Which relationships are you glad that you invested time in? How did you treat yourself and others, and what did that look like in your life? Write down as much as you can about this picture. Go as detailed as you want, but you don't need to obsess over every tiny detail. And what you'll find is that as you start to capture the scene, certain words or associations might start to rise to the fore. They'll probably center around things or sentiments like courage, kindness, maybe generosity, being funny, caring, loving, brave, whatever the case is, but you'll start to get a certain sense of the words that sit beneath all the things that you've just written down. Essentially, these are all of the different ways of being, of how you carried out and how you chose to behave across all those different activities will start to float to the surface. And I simply now want you to just tease out all of those types of words, however many or few there are. And then once you've got a list of all those different options, I want you to try and narrow them down to 3 to 5. So if I were to force you to choose and say, you're about to get on a boat and you can only take 3 to 5 of these, everything else has to be left behind, which are the ones that you just naturally gravitate towards? Again, don't spend too much time obsessing over this. Just get a sense of which ones resonate most strongly with you and jot them down in a separate list. By way of example, the 5 that are on my list and that I've been using actively in my life for the best part of 8 years now are honesty, fairness, responsibility, kindness, and curiosity. I'd love to hear the ones that float up for you, so please do drop them down into the comments down below. Now that you've got those words, I want you to flip from being on your deathbed to starting to imagine that you've somehow accidentally been able to stumble on watching your own funeral. You can either see this as a satellite link in from wherever you see yourself at that particular time, or it could even be that there's just been a mistake and people are holding a funeral for you. You're actually alive and well, but they don't know that, and you're watching in on what everyone is saying. Whichever scenario feels more relatable and a bit more playful for you, because again, we're not trying to create a morbid sense around this. We're simply trying to create that open, curious, and flexible mindset of what do we want the people we cared about most to be saying about us and to be remembering about us when our time comes. And as you're reflecting on these people capturing these words of how they remembered you, the ways you showed up, how you made them feel, the impact you had on their life, the sorts of things they're saying that leave you feeling good, glowing, warm, and importantly, content and satisfied that all those choices and actions that you made added up to a life that you're really proud you lived and left this impact on other people. And now compare what you think other people, what you might want other people to say about you, and look at the list of words that you've created, those 3 to 5 that you've chosen, and see to what extent those feel like they match up. And if they do, great. What you've got now is a set of core values that you can start to use to guide your choices and actions, which I'll explain in just a second. And if they don't match up completely, then again, that's fine. Be flexible, be curious. Are there words from that particular scene that you might want to swap in instead for one of the other words that you have in your list of 3 to 5? Go through this exercise again and just get to a point where you now sit back and you look at these 3 to 5 words and think to yourself, if I were on my deathbed and I felt like my life largely consisted of actions and choices that were consistent with these words and they had that impact on the people that I cared about after I'm gone, would I feel like that is a life that I'm glad I chose to live? And once you feel comfortable that you've got those sets of words, and again, we can change these words at a later stage. What matters is, do they feel like a good place to start for you? We're then going to start stepping into the next step of the process. As I just mentioned, these 3 to 5 words are now your core values. They're not words to frame and stick on a wall and look at admiringly, but instead to play around with and experiment with in your own life and your own choices and your actions in the next few weeks. Because this is what it means to live an intentional life. It's to decide on a small set of core values that matter to you. Not that you've inherited from other people, from patterns, from society, from peer pressure. Values such as discipline and hard work and perseverance, these could be ones that really matter strongly to you, but often they're also ones that we've just simply inherited from the lives that we experienced as we grew up or the pressures we felt as we moved into early careers, but they're not necessarily the ones that we would choose for ourselves. And the difference between those types of values and the ones you've just chosen is exactly that. They're the ones you've chosen you want to represent for the way that you're choosing to live your life and the impact that you want to have with that life. And once you get to the end with this list, there's a certain exhilaration that comes with that feeling. Or there should be, at least. Because again, we're being open, curious, and flexible about this. It shouldn't bring a sense of pressure or intimidation. It should just be a case of, these are now things that you can play around with. You basically have a cheat sheet for how you want to start showing up and all the small choices and actions that you'll face every day, every week, as your life continues to unfold. And what you now have is a process to say, over the next week, start looking for opportunities to bring these values into your life, to use them to inform the sorts of ways that you want to behave and the actions that you want to take. So when you feel stuck or uncertain in moments over the coming days, pull out your list, have a look at those 3 to 5 words and say to yourself, what would my next action look like if I chose to be kind, generous, honest, brave, fun-loving in this situation? And then simply take out an action that aligns with one of those values, no matter how big or small it is. Go out and live that value. And if you can, and you really want to add even more to this process, make a note or keep a diary or journal entry, however you want to do it, of how you felt immediately after you carried out that value. And then just simply play around with these values over as many different opportunities and scenarios as you can over the course of a week. But you get to the end of the week, look back and reflect on all the moments and scenarios where you pulled out those values and made choices and took actions that you felt aligned with those values. And sum up the whole impact of that. What did it feel like to go through a whole week of living intentionally with choices and decisions that feel truly in line with the sort of life that you want to live and the type of person that you want to be? And if at the end of the week you feel like the values you were using aren't quite aligned with that picture, then feel free to try new ones. Use the week after to experiment with different ones and play around with them. Again, we're open, curious, and flexible about this. Because I know if you stay committed to this process and you keep playing around for long enough, and it won't take more than 2-3 weeks at most, I'm sure, you'll get to a point where you have a set of core values that right now reflect the type of life you want to build, the type of person you want to be, and you'll have a sense of proof of when you act out in line with these values and you take actions and choices that match up to them, you start to feel more like you're living an intentional life, like you're taking action every single day towards the sort of life that you want to look back on with pride and be happy about the impact that you had. Because this is how you create the blueprint for your life, for how to start taking the tiny choices and decisions and actions each day that will ultimately ensure that you avoid deathbed regret. Because that's how an intentional life, and one that actively combats deathbed regret, is built. Not through massive grand gestures or goals or achievements, but small, intentional, aligned choices that you know are adding up to the picture of who you want to be and the life that you want to say you've lived. Now, if you are wondering about how goals and actions and all of those other more specifics and habits that we could be bringing in fit into this picture, that's a fair point, and you're probably going to want to check out this video next, where I talk about how values, goals, and actions all come together.